The moment the groom paused for exactly 3 seconds before saying, I do, beneath a ceiling of imported crystal and in front of more than 300 guests, I knew the man about to marry my stepsister was lying about who he was. But what I discovered minutes later ruined a $10 million wedding. My name is Sienna Vale. And if you're watching this from somewhere far less insane than a private oceanfront estate in Palm Beach, count yourself lucky. Because that night looked like a fairy tale built by people who had never heard the word enough. There were white roses flown in from Ecuador, a champagne tower taller than I was, security posted every 20 feet, and enough cameras from society magazines and business media to make it feel less like a wedding and more like a corporate merger in couture. The estate belonged to Adrian Beaumont, my stepfather, the kind of cold, polished billionaire who could make a compliment sound like a warning. His daughter Celeste was the bride. Picture old money, diamond earrings the size of raindrops, a custom gown rumored to cost more than most people's houses, and the kind of smile that said she had never once been told no and actually believed that meant she was special. And then there was the groom, Damien Thorne. That was the name everyone was using. That was the name printed in gold calligraphy on the menus, embossed on the gift wall, whispered approvingly by investors, senators, and women who liked to describe men as well-bred, even when they meant rich. He was handsome in that polished, camera-ready way rich families love. Tailored tuxedo, perfect posture, the right schools, the right handshake, the right story. Too right. That was my first problem with him. Men like Damien are never that seamless in real life. Everything looked perfect, but something felt off. I noticed it first during the prenup signing ceremony. Yes, ceremony. Because apparently when your wedding budget crosses 8 figures, even legal paperwork becomes performance art. Adrian had arranged a private glass pavilion beside the main reception lawn where the final documents would be signed before the vows. A string quartet played softly. 2 attorneys stood nearby. A photographer crouched at just the right angle to capture intimate candor for a magazine spread. Damien took the pen. He smiled. Then for half a second his hand tightened. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I did. I was standing 6 feet away holding Celeste's second bouquet, don't ask, and I saw his cuff slide back just enough to reveal a small black tattoo near his wrist. A crown over a broken playing card. My stomach dropped so fast it felt physical. I had seen that mark before. Not on him. But that wasn't the strangest part. When Adrian's chief of security, Marcus Reed, stepped forward to guide the signed documents toward the legal folder, Damien looked at him blankly and said, "Thank you, sir." Sir. Marcus had worked for Adrian for 11 years. Every serious person in that circle knew him by name. Damien had supposedly spent the last year vacationing with the family, negotiating business with Adrian, joining them in Saint-Tropez, Aspen, and Martha's Vineyard. But he didn't know the head of security. I didn't realize it then. But that moment mattered. Then came the chapel terrace. The sun was setting over the water, turning everything gold. Guests settled into rows of ivory chairs. A minister stood beneath an arch made of orchids and white peonies. Cell phones rose despite the staff politely asking people not to record. Nobody ever follows rules at events like that. They just break them in expensive clothes. I stayed near the back, where staff, lawyers, and family orbiters tend to gather. Close enough to watch, far enough to think. Celeste floated down the aisle on Adrian's arm, and the crowd made that soft collective sound people make when they see wealth pretending to be romance. Damien smiled at her. Too late. Too rehearsed. And when the officiant began speaking, I saw something else. Damien kept avoiding the photographers. Not casually, deliberately. He turned slightly every time a lens pointed directly at him. At first, I thought it was nerves. Then Celeste reached for his hand and whispered, "You're freezing." He answered, smiling for the guests, "Long day." But I was close enough to see the pulse pounding in his neck. A few minutes later, one of Adrian's older investors leaned toward me and asked quietly, How long has the groom known Celeste's mother's side of the family? I frowned. Why? He kept his eyes on the altar. Because when I congratulated him earlier, he called her aunt by the wrong name. I looked up sharply. You're sure? He gave the slightest nod. Very. That made three things. The tattoo, the security slip, the family mistake. Still, I said nothing. Be honest. What would you do in my place? Blow up a wedding on instinct? Or wait until instinct becomes proof? Because I've learned something about rich people. They survive scandal all the time. What they don't survive is evidence. So I waited. And then I saw him leave the reception corridor 10 minutes before the vows were supposed to end. Not toward the bar, not toward the groom's suite, toward the service wing. He moved fast, one hand at his ear like he was adjusting an earpiece, but he wasn't wearing one. I set down the bouquet and followed him past the catering hall, past two kitchen staff carrying silver trays, and down a quieter hallway lined with staff-only doors. That's when I heard his voice. Low, sharp, nothing like the polished groom voice. No, listen to me, he hissed. Once the marriage license is filed, the transfer window opens. I don't care what Adrian suspects. By tomorrow morning, it's locked in. I stopped cold. There was a second voice now, tinny through a phone speaker. I couldn't make out every word. But I heard enough. Access to Beaumont accounts. She still doesn't know who you are. After tonight, Sienna becomes a problem too. My name. My blood turned to ice. I edged closer to the half-open door and looked inside. Damien had his phone in one hand and a leather document sleeve in the other. A second passport had slipped halfway out. I could see the photo. I could see his face. And I could see the name. It was not Damien Thorne. And that's when everything changed. I didn't gasp. I didn't burst into the room. I didn't even move. I just stood there in that dim service hallway, staring through the narrow gap in the door as the man everyone believed was Damien Thorne flipped through a passport that proved he wasn't. They expected me to panic. I didn't. Instead, I listened. You said this was clean. He snapped into the phone, his voice stripped of charm. You said no one from my past was anywhere near this circle. A pause. Then he laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. Well, now she is. My name again. My fingers tightened against the wall. He knew me. Not just by name, by relevance. I'll handle it, he continued. After the vows, there's a window during the asset consolidation. Another pause. Because if I walk now, we lose everything. Everything. That word echoed louder than anything else he said. Money, access, control. This wasn't a marriage, it was a transaction. And Celeste wasn't the only target. I stepped back silently just as he snapped the passport shut and shoved it into the leather sleeve. His footsteps moved toward the door and I slipped behind a catering cart, lowering my head like I belonged there. He walked past me without a second glance. Perfect groom again. Perfect smile. Perfect lie. But now I knew, and I didn't realize it then. But that moment would destroy him later. The ceremony resumed like nothing was wrong. Of course it did. That's the thing about rooms full of powerful people. They don't notice cracks unless the ceiling actually collapses on them. Celeste stood there glowing, fingers wrapped around his, completely unaware that the man holding her hand had another name, another past, and a very specific plan for her family's fortune. They were celebrating, while everything was about to collapse. I slipped back into the crowd, my mind racing faster than my heartbeat. Think, Sienna, reacting emotionally would ruin everything. Acting strategically would end it. I needed proof. Not suspicion, not intuition. Proof that would survive lawyers, headlines, and Adrian Beaumont himself. Because if I was wrong, even a little, I wouldn't just ruin a wedding. I would destroy my own place in that world permanently. And Adrian didn't forgive mistakes. Ever. The vows ended. Applause erupted. Champagne trays appeared like magic. Music swelled. And just like that, the night shifted from ceremony to celebration. I stayed quiet, observing, collecting, layer by layer. Damien, whatever his real name was, moved through the crowd flawlessly. He greeted investors by name now. He laughed at the right moments. He kissed Celeste's hand like a man deeply in love. But once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. Every smile looked measured, every interaction calculated. Then came the first real slip. One of Adrian's European partners approached them, a man Damien had supposedly done business with in Monaco. "Good to see you again," the man said warmly. Damien hesitated. Half a second? Too long. Then he recovered. Of course. Of course, not a name. Not a memory. Just a safe response. I watched the partner's smile falter slightly before he masked it. There it was again. Another signal. Another inconsistency. But that wasn't the worst part. It wasn't the worst. An hour later, during the photo session, the wedding photographer tried to gather the couple for a private shoot near the ocean terrace. Damien resisted. Subtly at first. "Let's do more group shots," he suggested. The photographer insisted. "Just a few alone. The light is perfect." Celeste laughed. "Come on, it'll take 2 minutes." His jaw tightened. Then he agreed. But when they stepped into position, I saw it clearly. He angled his face away from direct light. Again, and again, and again. Avoiding clean shots, avoiding clarity, avoiding documentation. That wasn't insecurity. That was strategy. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Oh, who hides from photos at their own wedding? Someone who doesn't want to be recognized later? "Hey," a voice whispered beside me. I turned. It was Marcus, Adrian's head of security. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. "You've been watching him," he said quietly. Not a question. A statement. I held his gaze. "You noticed, too." A beat of silence, then, very slightly, he nodded. "What did you see?" he asked. I hesitated. This was the moment. Trust or stay alone. "Not here," I said under my breath. "But something's wrong. Very wrong." Marcus studied me for a second longer. Then he leaned closer. "Adrian asked me the same thing 20 minutes ago." My heart skipped. "He feels it too?" Marcus didn't answer directly, but his next word said everything. "If you know something," he murmured, "you need to tell me before the contracts are signed." Contracts. Of course. The post-ceremony financial agreements. The real reason this wedding mattered. I exhaled slowly. "Give me 30 minutes," I said. "I need proof." Marcus straightened. "You don't have 30 minutes," he replied quietly. "You have maybe 15. Then he walked away. 15 minutes. That was all I had before whatever Damien was planning became irreversible. No pressure, I moved fast. Back through the service corridors, back to that room. The door was closed now. Locked. But expensive weddings come with predictable flaws, especially when staff rotates constantly. I grabbed a passing server. "Hey, they need more champagne in the East Lounge?" "Now." She nodded and handed me her tray without thinking. Uniform, access. I walked straight past 2 staff members and slipped behind the service counter near the office hallway. There, the door, still locked, but the keycard reader blinked green when a catering supervisor passed through. Timing. I caught the door before it shut, slipped inside, and closed it quietly behind me. The room was empty. Desk, leather bag, laptop, documents. My pulse roared in my ears. I moved straight to the bag, opened it, found the passport. Hands steady, eyes scanning, name, Daniel Kessler. Nationality, not the one he claimed. Multiple entry stamps, different countries, different timelines. This man had been everywhere, but never where he said he had been. Then I saw something else. A second document. A contract draft. With Adrian Beaumont's company header and a clause highlighted. Marriage triggered asset access authorization. My breath caught. This wasn't just fraud. This was infiltration. Calculated, legal, devastating, and then footsteps. Right outside the door. I froze. The handle moved, and that's when I realized I wasn't the only one hunting the truth anymore. The door handle turned slowly, and I had exactly 1 second to decide whether to hide, run, or pretend I belonged there. So I did something better. I didn't move at all. The door opened, and Daniel, whatever his real name was, stepped inside. For a split second, his eyes locked onto mine. No confusion, no surprise. Just recognition. Cold, immediate, calculated. "Well," he said quietly, closing the door behind him, "that saves me the trouble of finding you." My heart slammed against my ribs, but my face stayed calm. "You used the wrong name," I replied evenly. "Daniel." A flicker crossed his expression. Gone just as fast. "You always were observant," he said. That confirmed it. He knew me, and I didn't realize it then. But that connection was the key to everything. "Where do I know you from?" I asked, stepping slightly away from the desk, keeping distance between us. He smiled. Not the polished Groom smile, the real one. Sharp. Dangerous. 3 years ago, he said, tilting his head. Chicago. Private investment event. You were with Beaumont's legal team. My memory snapped into place like glass locking into a frame. A man thrown out of a closed-door meeting. Security escorting him. Voices raised. Fraud accusations. I had only seen his profile back then. But the tattoo was the same. "You tried to pitch a deal," I said slowly, "and got blacklisted." He chuckled. "Blacklisted is such a dramatic word." "You were exposed," I corrected. His eyes darkened. "Temporarily misunderstood." That was when I knew exactly what he was. Not just a liar, a professional one. He took a step closer. I matched it by stepping back. No sudden moves, no panic. Control the moment. "What are you doing here, Sienna?" he asked softly. "Really?" I held his gaze. "Stopping you." He smiled again. "You're late." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, glancing briefly at his watch, "that in less than 10 minutes, your dear stepfather signs the final authorization tied to this marriage." He tapped the document on the desk. "And once that happens, everything changes." Everything. That word again. But this time, I understood it. "Asset access," I said. "You're not just marrying her. You're entering the company." "Not entering," he corrected. "Unlocking." A chill spread through me. This wasn't about a wedding. This was about control. Millions. No, tens of millions. Maybe more. "Be honest," I said quietly. "How much?" He smiled wider. "Enough that people like Adrian never recover from the mistake." For a second, silence filled the room. Then I asked the question that had been building since the hallway. "Why me?" That made him pause. Just slightly. "You heard that?" he said. "Yes." A long look. Then, "Because you're the only variable I didn't account for." That wasn't comforting. "What does that mean?" I pressed. "It means," he said calmly, "that you were never supposed to be here tonight." My chest tightened. "And yet," he continued, "here you are, recognizing things no one else does." He stepped closer again, this time closer than before. "And that makes you dangerous." "Be honest. What would you do in that moment? Scream, run, threaten him?" I didn't do any of those things. Because I already understood something critical. Men like him don't fear noise. They fear exposure. So I leaned in slightly and said, "You're done." He blinked. Just once. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Soft, controlled, almost impressed. "You still think you have leverage?" he said. I have proof, I replied. I tapped the passport, the documents, the bag. All of this ends you. His smile didn't fade. Only if it reaches the right people in time. My stomach dropped. What did you do? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked past me calmly, picked up the leather sleeve, and slid the passport inside. By the time anyone listens to you, he said, the contracts will already be executed. Executed. Final. Irreversible. That's when it hit me. Marcus was right. I didn't have time. Footsteps passed outside again. Voices. Closer this time. Staff moving faster. The reception was shifting phases. Speeches soon. Then the signing. Then it would be over. They're calling you, I said. He adjusted his cufflinks calmly. They're calling Damien, he corrected. Then he looked at me one last time. And if I were you? A pause. I'd decide very quickly whether you want to walk away from this quietly, or, he stepped even closer, become part of the fallout. Then he walked out, just like that, leaving me alone, with the truth. And a countdown. For a second, I stood there frozen. Not from fear, from calculation. Think. Think faster. You have proof. But proof means nothing without timing, without control, without impact. They expected me to panic. I didn't. Instead, I moved. Fast. I pulled out my phone, took photos of everything, passport, documents, signatures, highlighted clauses, every detail. Then I did something even more important. I sent it. Not to Marcus, not to Adrian, to someone else, someone who could make sure this didn't just become a private scandal, but a public collapse. Message sent. No undo, no hesitation. Then I fixed my dress, checked my reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. Calm, composed, invisible again. Because the next phase wasn't about stopping him quietly, it was about destroying him completely, in front of everyone. When I stepped back into the reception, the music had changed. The lights dimmed slightly, guests were gathering near the central stage, glasses raised, smiles everywhere. They were celebrating, while everything was about to collapse. Marcus caught my eye across the room. I gave him the smallest nod. Not explanation. Not yet. Just confirmation. I know. He stiffened slightly. Good. Let him prepare. And then the announcer's voice echoed across the estate. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the first toast. Perfect. Exactly what I needed. Because what they didn't know yet was that this wedding wasn't heading toward a celebration. It was heading toward an exposure. And in just a few minutes, I was going to be the one holding the microphone. The moment my fingers wrapped around the microphone, the entire wedding shifted, and they didn't even realize it yet. Crystal glasses were raised. The ocean shimmered behind the stage. 300 of the most powerful people in that city turned toward me, expecting something soft, polite, forgettable. A toast. Instead, they were about to witness a collapse. But that wasn't the best part. The best part? I wasn't improvising. They expected me to panic. I didn't. I had already built the moment. 10 minutes earlier, while everyone was celebrating, my message had been delivered. Not just sent, received, opened, and understood. Because I didn't send it to just anyone. I sent it to Evelyn Carter. If you've ever dealt with high-level financial litigation, you know that name. She doesn't just expose fraud. She dismantles reputations so completely that people disappear from boardrooms overnight. And she owed me a favor. A big one. So when my phone vibrated silently in my hand as I stepped onto the stage, I already knew what it meant. Everything was in motion. Wow, I said into the microphone, smiling as the crowd quieted. I don't think I've ever seen this much money in one place pretending to be about love. Laughter, soft, comfortable. They thought I was joking. Good. Let them relax. I let my gaze sweep across the crowd slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Damien. He was watching me now. Not smiling, not relaxed, alert. Good. You know, I continued, when you're invited to a wedding like this, you expect perfection. I glanced at Celeste. She beamed at me, completely unaware. And tonight, I said, everything looks perfect. Pause, then, but something felt off. The laughter faded, just slightly. Enough. I took a slow breath. Time to escalate. I've known this family a long time, I said. Long enough to recognize when something doesn't belong. Now people were listening. Really listening. What they didn't know yet was that I had already seen the truth. Damien shifted, just a fraction. But I saw it. So did Marcus. Because earlier tonight, I said calmly, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. A ripple moved through the crowd. Confusion, curiosity, tension. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. Celeste frowned. And Damien? Still watching me. Still calculating. So I have a question, I said, turning slowly toward him. For the groom. All eyes followed. Every single one. 300 witnesses. Cameras. Phones already rising. Damien, I said sweetly. A pause. Or should I say, Daniel? Silence. Total. Absolute. The kind that doesn't happen at weddings. Celeste blinked. What? Adrian straightened. Marcus moved. Subtly. But ready. And Damien? He didn't speak. Not yet. I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, tapped once, and then the large projection screen behind the stage flickered to life. Gasps erupted instantly. A passport. His face. His real name. Clear. Undeniable. Daniel Kessler. That's strange, I said lightly. Because I thought we were celebrating Damien Thorne tonight. The murmurs exploded. Louder, faster, uncontrolled. Phones up everywhere now, recording, sharing, capturing the moment he never wanted documented. Celeste turned to him, her voice shaking. Damien, what is this? He didn't answer. Not immediately, which was his biggest mistake. Because hesitation, in a room like that, is confession. But that's not all. I continued. And that's when everything really broke. Because the next image appeared. The contract. Highlighted clause. Marriage-triggered asset access. Adrian's company name. Legal language. Clear intent. Adrian stepped forward sharply. What is this? His voice cut through the chaos. Cold. Dangerous. The kind of tone that ends careers. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Damien. Maybe he'd like to explain, I said. For a moment, he actually smiled, which I'll admit surprised me, because most people crumble when exposed. But not him. Not immediately. Impressive, he said, stepping forward. Still composed, still controlled. You planned this well. Murmurs again. Confusion. Wait, what? But incomplete, he added calmly. That made my chest tighten slightly. Incomplete? No. No, I had everything. Didn't I? He turned to the crowd. To everyone here, he said smoothly, you're being shown documents taken out of context. Gaslighting. Classic. Expected. And as for the name, he continued, smiling slightly, legal identities change all the time in international business. Some people nodded, doubt creeping back. That was dangerous. Very dangerous. Then he looked directly at me. And you, he said quietly, should have stayed out of this. That's when I smiled, because this was the moment I had been waiting for. You're right, I said softly. I should have stayed out of it. A pause, then, but she didn't. The screen changed again, not to another document, to a live video call. And the face that appeared made the entire room freeze. Evelyn Carter. Good evening, she said calmly. I apologize for interrupting, but I believe I have additional context. The silence that followed, heavier than anything before. Because now, this wasn't a family scandal. This was legal, public, unstoppable. Evelyn continued. We've been tracking Daniel Kessler for over 2 years in connection with multiple financial infiltration cases across Europe and the US. Gasps, real ones this time. And based on the evidence submitted to us, she added, glancing down briefly, this wedding appears to be part of a coordinated attempt to gain unauthorized access to Beaumont Holdings. Now Adrian moved. Fast. Marcus was already beside him. Security shifted across the room. Celeste stepped back from Damien like he had just burned her. No, she whispered. And that's when everything collapsed. But what they didn't know yet was that this still wasn't the full truth. And the next thing I was about to reveal would destroy more than just him. The moment everyone thought it was over, I realized the real target had never been Celeste. It was me. Silence crushed the entire estate as Evelyn's words echoed through the speakers. Security closed in. Guests stepped back. Phones kept recording. And Daniel, finally lost that perfect control. He looked at me. Not angry, not panicked, focused. You figured it out too late, he said quietly. That's when it clicked. All of it. The Chicago incident. The tattoo. The way he recognized me immediately. I wasn't collateral damage. I was the original target. I stepped closer to the microphone, my voice steady. No, I said. He didn't come for her. I turned slowly toward Adrian. He came for me. The reaction was instant. Confusion. Shock. Anger. Adrian's voice cut through it. Explain. So I did. 3 years ago, I helped shut down his operation, I said calmly. I flagged the financial inconsistencies. I triggered the investigation. I looked back at Damien. And he didn't forget. Everything snapped into place for the room. This wasn't just greed. This was revenge. Calculated, patient, expensive. Evelyn's voice came through again. There's more, she said. The screen changed. Bank transfers, accounts, names, and one of them made my stomach drop. Celeste. Gasps erupted again. She shook her head instantly. No, that's not. But the timestamps didn't lie. She wasn't innocent. Not completely. She knew enough, Evelyn continued. Not everything, but enough to benefit. Adrian didn't yell. He didn't move. Which was worse. Security grabbed Damien. For the first time, he resisted. Just slightly. Then he looked at me one last time. You won, he said. A pause. But it cost you your family. Oh, he wasn't wrong, because when I looked at Celeste, she wasn't crying. She was staring at me, like I had ruined her life. The wedding dissolved in minutes. Police, lawyers, guests disappearing like nothing had ever happened. Money freezing, deals collapsing, reputations shattering in real time. An hour later, I stood alone near the empty altar. Shoes in my hand, ocean quiet again, like none of it mattered. Adrian approached me slowly. You knew, he said. Yes. A long silence, then, you did the right thing. From him, that was everything. I walked away without looking back. No drama, no victory speech, just clarity. Because they thought this was a wedding. It wasn't. It was an ending.